Hi, I'm Jim Edmonson. This is Port Aransas, a collection of memories. Opal Marcy is here to tell us about communications in Port Aransas in the early years. Opal Marcy moved to Port Aransas in 1932. October the 13th, she remembers the day. She was down here in Port Aransas on a 6-month leave of absence from her job in Kansas. And she liked Port Aransas so well that she stayed here. And in 1933, she went to work for Port Telephone Company as an assistant operator. She worked as an operator for Port Telephone for 20 years until she retired. She presently lives in Port Aransas at the Seagull Cottages, which she operates today.
No. Correction.
Oh, go ahead.
I didn't own the cottages, and I don't work there.
Okay.
I live in my own home.
She lives in her own home at Seagull Cottages.
No. I live in my own home on the station. I'm completely retired from everything.
Okay, fine. How did I get Seagull Cottages?
Well, I just worked there for a long time.
Okay, fine. It came in there somewhere, and I couldn't figure out how I got off. Ms. Marcy, welcome this evening. First of all, if you would, please, tell me where the original telephone company was located.
The original telephone company is located in the same place it is now. I think that's Avenue C, I believe. In a house, one room in a house, where Miss Moonwalker lives today.
Will you speak just a little bit louder so that we make sure that
All
the
right.
microphone... Okay.
Yeah. The front room, the front bedroom of her home today was the telephone office.
Okay.
And it had a door leading out to the front porch. And we had a small telephone switchboard there. And we also had a telephone booth in that building. There were one more telephone booth on the island, that was at the Tarpon Inn. Pay telephone. It really wasn't a pay, but it was what you would call.
What exactly did the telephone company, other than the physical, how many employees worked for the telephone company at that time?
Two.
Two.
The chief engineer of the electric plant, he and his wife originally lived in that house. And his wife was supposed to be the chief operator. Supposed to be.
Supposed to be.
Yes.
And you were the assistant.
And I was the assistant. And the first chief operator was Agnes Page, Teddy Matthews' sister. She and I worked out fine. The second one wasn't so good, and I quit and left because I didn't want to live in the building.
How did y'all split hours, Miss Marcy?
Well, that was the problem with the second operator. We didn't split very much.
It got to be a one-sided affair?
One-sided affair. And after I was gone for some time, the manager of all the companies contacted my sister and wanted me back. And she told him why I left. And he said, then I came back, and I was given the chief operator's position. And I could live any place I wanted to, hire who I wanted to, and work the hours I wanted to. So I did. I worked from 5 o'clock in the afternoon until 11 o'clock the next morning. And I hired an assistant to work from 11 o'clock in the morning till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I cooked my own meals, my own supper at night, and I cooked my own breakfast.
About what was the pay of an operator? This is 1933, and this
yes,
is Depression.
I got
These are
$60
depressions.
a month, and out of that, I paid the assistant operator $15.
So you wound up with a net of 45.
45 was a lot of money in those days.
It was pretty good money.
Yes.
Okay.
That's why I had to work those hours.
How many subscribers or who actually did you serve?
When I went in there were 15 telephones. And it was a little switchboard that when they rang in, it just dropped, a little drop down, and you had to pay close attention to your switchboard and hear that click, and then you could see it would be a number above that little thing that dropped down.
Numbered like
1, 2, or 13, 14.
In other words, each time it rang, you knew who it was.
Yes, and I would plug in, and that's the way. And then when you rang, when they hung up, you push the little drop up pretty quicker. And then you could go back in the back. You could put the night bell on, just like an alarm clock, and go in the back and have coffee with anybody in the back. And when they rang in,
the night bell would ring.
The night bell would ring, and that's how you didn't have very many calls. You only had 15 people that had telephone.
And some of them, or at least most of them, slept at night.
Yes. Yes, you didn't. But it was coffee in the afternoon.
Were there any marine calls or anything to do with boats?
The tarpon, no. The pilots had a telephone, and a lot of times the secretary of the pilots would go out on someplace, and if he was expecting a call, he would tell me. And when the call came in, I would ask if I could. I knew where he was, and asked if I could leave a message, take a message. And then when he came in, he would call me back, and I would tell him so-and-so called, and then he would call back in the office.
Can you remember, I don't think this is privileged information, but can you remember some of the early subscribers, or who the early telephones on this island were?
Yes, Mrs. Fred Farley had one, and the Tarpon Inn had one, and Pilot Association, and Bar Farley had one, Barney Farley had one, Barney's Place, Golding's Mercantile, down on the waterfront had one. I don't know, there were 15, but the Tarpon Inn and the Pilots Association, they also had their own direct line to Ranges Pass, as well as the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard had a telephone, and the Lighthouse had a telephone.
Now, at that time, did y'all place long-distance calls?
Yes. The way we did, we would take down on our ticket everything that you wanted. Then we would call Ranges Pass and pass the ticket as it was given to us to them, and they'd take it down. And then they'd give it to Corpus. And then they'd get the charge from Corpus, and then they'd pass the charge to us. And then we'd bill our tickets, our bills from those tickets.
And how did you handle emergencies on the island at this time? If someone called the telephone company with an emergency, how was that handled?
Well, I don't know that we had so many emergencies. I can't remember emergencies.
No. How about during hurricanes and things like that?
Well, during the hurricanes, everybody left, except me.
And to show that Opal Marcy did not leave, upon her retirement, they ran an article in the Corpus Christi Caller that I'd like for the camera to zoom in on, and even the headline of the article is "Ignored Storms for 20 Years." Now, tell me why you ignored storms for 20 years.
The first storm that hit when I first started working, my sister raised such a fuss that I had to leave. And we went home for Christmas, and I talked to my father. I worked in the doctor's office, and I never left the office when the contagious disease came in. And I felt like that if I didn't leave the office when a contagious disease came in from the doctor's office, I shouldn't leave my position here when a storm came in when I was needed. And he agreed with me. He said, if you can't stick to the board when you need it, then get off of it. And I stuck with it. I'm not a quitter.
Do you stay today in hurricane?
No, I said when I quit, I would never stay through another one. But the first one was hit, I stayed through what I did.
I think today they make some sort of allowances for all emergency personnel, such as telephone and fire and police and all, that there are a certain number of them that do stay through hurricanes and everything.
Now,
But during that time, that's bound to have been pretty scary. Can you remember some of the scary things that happened to you during, about how many hurricanes can you remember having to sit through as an operator, Miss Marcy?
I sat through one on top of the ice floats in the ice plant. I waited out of the telephone office. The water came up in there, and my brother-in-law came after Mr. Walker and Mr. Walker. They were living in the house, and we waited out. And I waited out with water above my knees. I had to hang on to his back, and we went around the front like he came over, but there wasn't any water. And there was a line pit where the water came out, the ice manufacturing deal. So then it came off, and he went down in it, and I went down on top of it. Mr. Walker went down on it, and Ms. Walker went down on top of it. We climbed out of that, and we went to the door, and it had been boarded up with sandbags enough to keep the water from coming in on the machines. So we had to go up the building and go up and crawl through the ice chute and go into the ice bowl and then on out to the top of where you put your cans in to make your ice. And we were all wet, and we went behind a blanket, and I put on an old coat, the old overcoat that had been hanging there. Ms. Walker put on an old grease pair of coveralls being had been working in. And I don't know what the others did. Ms. Walker and I.
But that was a pretty safe place, or as safe as you could find it.
Yes, but we were hiding on top of the ice boat because it was coming up. We could watch.
Water got that high.
We watched it as it came over the generators, and each one of us had a different thing. I had a wheel on the machine I was watching to see how close it was getting to that before it came up over where the ice was made.
At this time, Miss Marcy, what about, and we're speaking now of the 30s or 40s, what was the population of the island about? Can you remember?
I think about 650.
650. But not that many residential phones. Telephones,
Mr. Walker, when he came in 36, I believe, 1936. And he's the one that really generated.
And he was the engineer for the telephone?
No, he was a manager then. The other manager had been dismissed, and he came as the manager.
Okay, now the owner of the telephone company was a gentleman out of Dallas?
No, not then. The owner was Gail Borden Munson
Oh.
in Connecticut, and he had died, and his wife inherited it. And then she brought her sister and brother-in-law, Ms. Walker, to take charge. And he really got people to get installing telephones. And the board, I don't know how many, he filled up the whole board, and then he went four rows across till the top row I had to stand to reach, because I'm not sure. And I told him when he filled the top row, I quit. Well, he filled the top row, and then I moved over to his office as looking for a secretary.
This Mr. Jackson of
But I was
Dallas,
still chief operator.
you were still chief.
I taught them all, and I had to go back in the school.
Well, you were the most familiar with all the equipment and everything else by this time. This Mr. Jackson of Dallas, who owned the company.
C. Jackson, he was a fine man.
When did he begin running the
Well,
company, or own the company?
they sold the company.
The Borden sold the company?
The Borden, they sold to Frank Marcus. And then he in turn sold it to Mr. Jackson. And then Mr. Walker's health been failing. And Mr. Jackson knew that he couldn't take care of it all up to his phone. So he began to sell some of it out and just get the telephone office for a long time. And then he sold the electric plant and the ice plant to Secretary of Life.
When did Port Telephone Company become Mustang Telephone?
When Mr. Jackson sold it to
The people in Louisiana?
yeah.
As it had
No, he sold it to somebody in Corpus. John Nixon's, Molly Nixon's father-in-law, and they changed in Mustang.
Miss Marcy, the telephone calls at that time and understanding the way your switchboard operated, what were calls that came into your office, what were they generally like? I mean, today I know when I call an operator, generally I have to get ready to accustom myself to her usual speech or something, but were y'all a little more relaxed? Were the calls a little more friendly?
We were I was very businesslike. I didn't visit. I took the call and put it through. Some of the operators got, if you got tickets stacked up and then
Or could you call house to house during this time? I mean, you could just dial someone else's number?
Yes.
Okay. Then they had to use you
They couldn't get anywhere.
to call
without
off the
me.
island. They couldn't get anywhere without calling you.
Only the tarpaulin and the Coast Guard. They had their own direct line.
If they were calling off the island. But
No,
on,
they could call me and get off the
now, on the island, could they call each other?
they could call anybody, because they had our line, and they had their own direct line.
Did they leave messages with the operator if they were going to be gone several days or something like that?
No, not the tarpaulin or the Coast Guard, but friends would leave messages. They would take their telephone off the hook and next to the baby and go into the neighbors, and if the baby cries, call me. If my husband calls, call me, I'm going to be set the place.
Do you think you would want to be an operator today on Mustang Island? Miss Marcy?
No.
Why,
I don't.
Miss Marcy?
People today aren't like they were.
In which ways can you?
I think people those days were kinder and more considerate in their communication.
And it speaks well for the time. Miss Marcy, I'd like to thank you on behalf of Port Aransas Library for being with us this evening. And this will conclude our interview with Miss Opal Marcy, and I'll definitely thank her for sharing her memories with us about early communications in Port Aransas.